Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It is officially time for the Israel Update with Hanoch Young, Mike Clayton, and internet issues happening already this morning. Hanoch, as you said, in Israel, every man, woman, dog, and bird is on the internet this morning and this evening or whenever. You guys are. The next step basically is in lockdown. They're going to chain you to your bed, I guess. Is that pretty close?
We're coming pretty close because lockdown, which again in Israel right now means that we're limited to be 500 meters from our home. They're going to intensify it because there were a number of loopholes. I guess the big issue is there are not supposed to be any indoor services for Yom Kippur at any synagogue in the country, which is beyond unprecedented.
So you say there's not going to be any indoor services. I guess that they're trying to figure out how to allow, they're going to be out in the park doing Yom Kippur. What does that look like?
Depending on where the synagogue is located, that may or may not be an option.
Okay.
You know, there are synagogues that are in the major cities.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of, a busy area. I don't know. I have no idea how this is going to work.
Now, you're going to go from there into Sukkot. In Israel, you guys don't go camping for 7 or 8 days, which, a lot of us do here. You guys normally will build your own sukkah out on the deck or something like that. Is there any problems as far as getting supplies for that this year? Or have you looked
Well, I imagine that there'll be a lot of issues with it. I already have one that I've used over the years. Usually I pay a couple of high school kids to come and, put it up. Now it means that I'll be doing it myself, which I know you must find incredibly amusing. But there is
the man that's never mowed grass. Will you actually be using a hammer?
Yeah, if I had a hammer,
Could you make sure that we get video of, or at least a picture of Hanoch Young with a hammer? Well, I'm not sure if because you probably would know how to use a hammer, but for different reasons.
Yeah, we don't have to discuss that at this time. There are usually these large, almost like a fair-like, situation where people buy the Arba Minim, the 4 species the Torah calls for you to use on Sukkot during prayer. You can't do that this year. They're banning it. So I've already ordered one to be delivered. Anyone who's, doing that kind of stuff. So it's not delivered to the home, it's delivered to a certain pickup point. The situation in Israel is getting very complex. It appears that Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't have anywhere around the world to fly this week. So he's confronted with having to stay here in Israel like the rest of us. So he's trying to get the Attorney General to figure out how to declare a state of emergency. They want to shut down Ben Gurion Airport. I have no, what I'm struggling with is just that Israel locked down in March. And instead of following the lead of other countries, now whether you agree with how Sweden handled it or how South Korea handled it or anyone else, most of those countries are pretty much back to normal now. But in Israel, our prime minister advised us in May with no restrictions, go out, have a good time, have a beer, have a coffee, have a beer and a coffee. And Israelis did. They ran out celebrating, high-fiving everybody. And somehow we are at a point where, again, whether you believe in reported numbers or not, we were told in early May that if the numbers approached 1,000 new cases a day, we would have to go back. As of yesterday, 6,923 new cases.
Well, I don't think. Are you still there? You kind of froze up there.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've ever quoted the Twilight Zone on anything having to do with any of our teachings before, but I will do it on this time. Posted a thing on Facebook the other day I saw that was from the Twilight Zone, and what was it, Rod Sterling or something like that. And he was quoted on this is the 60s, okay? Can you imagine a disease that is so deadly that the government will have to test you to see if you have it? You can't, in the script of history, it would be difficult for normal human beings to be able to come up with things that are this strange. But it seems
It's absolutely true.
It seems like prophetic words are coming forth from the most unlikely places, like the Twilight Zone. Something that most people today, there are many people today that have never even seen an episode, and I don't really suggest it to begin with. But I just found that one very, very interesting, that we would see things that have been happening in the media for the last 50, 60 years that were kind of like hints of things that could be in the future. That almost makes you think that there could be some kind of a spiritual aspect of life that's going on around us. Oh, that would be crazy, right?
Well, there clearly is, and read things going on in the world. We're left, kind of scratching our heads saying what's going on. Benny Gantz, our Minister of Defense, kind of associate prime minister in waiting, whatever. He got to go away because he's in America, meeting with America's Secretary of Defense, Esper, to try to ensure that Israel maintains its qualitative military advantage. I love those terms, which American law, by the way, guarantees, interestingly enough, in a law that was passed a number of years ago.
How can America, by law, dictate Israel's? Is this just another aspect of this thing? America can dictate your borders. America can dictate who your friends are, and America can dictate if you're strong militarily or not?
No, it means that America, in selling or giving military aid to our enemies, has to maintain that we have some kind of advantage. Now, the reason is, of course, because the deal of selling F-35s, the most advanced, jet that America makes, to the United Arab Emirates is a done deal. President Trump said it. He sees no problem with it. He said it's good. It's good for American jobs. Now, of course, when that's followed shortly thereafter by America's other dear friend, the Saudis, and again, this is where in the back of people's minds they should be hearing, does anyone remember 9/11? Hello? The Saudis, when they say, well, we want F-35s too. America can't say, well, we can only sell them to the Emirates, but not to you. And then America's other dear friends, Egypt and Jordan, will say, hey, y'all, what about us?
So
now, it's not like there's never been a regime change in Egypt.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's not like King Abdullah of Jordan is in a secure position, but let's not confuse the issue with facts.
Well, what that is going to mean for if they sell them to Egypt is going to be a big boom in the tunnel industry going into Gaza, because they're going to have
Yeah.
to expand the tunnel there in Gaza so that they can not just bring in rockets, but they can ferry F-35s into Gaza, and maybe they can turn the beach then into a runway or something. I don't know.
It's almost like no one is thinking. I mean, in my blog post yesterday, no free falafels in the Middle East. I mean, the Trump plan, the Peace to Prosperity, calls for a two-state solution. People saying, well, it doesn't. The Accords, the Abrahamic Accords don't say it. It's based on the assumption of the Trump plan. Now, the idea that Israel has not given up sovereignty in the West Bank, in Judea, Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank, and for that I'd have to, give you a big, wink. Yeah, right. That Israel's only postponing it for 4 years. Gee, who's going to be sitting in the White House then? It's bad and getting worse because people aren't looking into this. They aren't saying that here is America going full steam ahead to divide the land of Israel.
Well,
and it's a stick in the carrot.
yeah, I was in Blue Ridge, Georgia this past weekend with
That's right.
Tony and the Exodus Road Band and Rico Cortez. Rico did the Torah service. And though I had taught the Torah portion the week prior to, I don't know why it did not register in my mind. But here we are in the parashah of leading up to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, and it is the chapters of Bereshit, Genesis 21 and 22, which is like Abraham, Sarah, the birth of Isaac, Ishmael being sent out into their own land, into his own land, don't make covenant. And this is what's happening during the Abrahamic Accords being signed, and a hurricane that in Hebrew, the name would have been Sarah, that's coming in to devour the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, about the only thing that could have happened more than that is if the eye of the hurricane had formed over Palestine, Texas or something, it was like absolutely obvious to me that the Almighty was saying, guys, just look at the scripture. But of course, politicians are not looking at scripture that well. But here's the problem that I see, Hanoch, is that most people, even those that are saying they're following the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, are not looking at world events through a biblical filter. It's still, it's the you've been going through the judges. I think what we weren't planning this. We were both looking at the same book at the same time. What stuck out to me in reading that book was everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
That's where we are today again. Your comments?
Sadly, that's really true. At a time when people should be enhancing their Torah knowledge and Torah faith and building up that level of understanding within their own families and their children, and working to strengthen their local congregations and fellowships, instead it's kind of like, we're going to head for them, them Var Hills. and just hunker down. Everyone seems to be following the latest distraction, the latest rabbit hole. And one of the things, I'm not the only person within the Jewish side of the family here in Israel that has expressed issues with the Abraham Accords. Although I've got to tell you, I don't know others writing in English that have been as clear and forthright. However, the point that I wanted to make about that, though, is here's a situation that's clearly a sarkana, a danger, and people are just kind of putting their fingers in their ears saying, I don't hear you. This is, again, in the background, they're playing the dawn of the age of Aquarius. Look, there's peace, at what price? And then, someone wrote to me the other day as a comment on the first blog that I put up a few days ago, comparing it to a second book of Judges, who said, you're the first person who commented on these accords from a biblical perspective. And this is in English. That really scared me. How are you supposed to look at it? If there isn't an overlay of what does it mean for the people of Israel? But even the concept of the people of Israel, is confusing to some for some reason, which I don't get.
Well, I think it goes back to a disconnect. The something I used this past weekend is a statement. It's not an original statement, but I can't remember where I heard it from. The Torah brings a couple of obvious conclusions without being stated in the Torah specifically. There is a destination that the Torah is saying you need to just kind of see that this is so obvious that there was never really a note being made to the side to show you that this is where we're heading to. But the Torah brings you to an obvious destination of the land of Israel. Period. If you're part of Abraham, you and I are going to discuss at some point this. We were talking about the grafted in issue here, but in the book of in our book in the Renewed Covenant, the book of Yaakov, and
I'm sorry you broke up. I didn't hear that.
Okay, in the book of Yaakov, in the book of Romans, of all places, it says, our father Abraham. And this goes to that adopted, grafted in, the foreigner, all of those things. With that being said, when you look at the Torah, Abraham never had a disconnect from the land of Israel. Isaac, Jacob, never, though Jacob went out into exile for a time, he never was disconnected from the land.
Yeah.
But somehow this disconnect is there. I think that some of it goes to just distractions of our day. I was bringing out this past weekend something that I looked at a number of years ago, that it's about distractions of our day. And now I don't know who did the study and how many millions of dollars they got from government money for this, but in the year 2000, the average attention span of a human being was about 12 seconds. In 2015, the attention span had been brought down to 8.25 seconds. I would imagine that today the attention span is much less than that. Now, interesting enough, and here's a statistic for you in case you ever find yourself on Jeopardy or one of those game shows, the average, the attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds.
That's really scary.
Yeah. So today, a goldfish has a longer attention span than most human beings. Maybe that's part of the problem. Not sure what the solution.
Wow. Well, I hope it doesn't mean that we start carrying around our friends and family in little plastic bags with water. You know, treating them like goldfish. But this is a time where you need to focus on priorities. And I'm constantly reminding people it's all about the restoration of all of Israel.
Yeah.
Judah and Ephraim, all based on mutual respect. Boom. But people are like, wait, but don't you see that, then they want to, cast world figures as, in biblical, terminology, and y'all are missing the boat.
Just walking it out, I mean, we've had 6,000 years of history, and where it appears that the Almighty has asked everyone that is called a person of faith to walk out their life by faith. But somehow in this day, he's going to break his pattern that he's laid down for 6,000 years in order to accommodate us.
Right.
Probably not happening.
Right.
I got one to ask you here.
Sure.
We were discussing a Facebook post from the other day, and the infamous RBG, Buzzy, whatever you want to call her. Here's a lady who was on the Supreme Court for decades, put in by Clinton. She is of Jewish descent. I'll put
Yes.
it that way. Somewhere along the way, she was asked about her Jewish faith and beliefs, and she said that it was a major thing for her life. This post that I'm talking about basically put her in a place right next to Mother Teresa, of her work on this planet. How does someone justify in their mind a person who was responsible, her rulings were responsible for literally millions of innocent unborn children, putting, I mean, if you put the numbers of Hitler up next to the numbers of Buzzy, Hitler would look like a saint. How does someone put it together in their mind?
Okay. It's actually pretty simple.
Okay.
It's an understanding of Judaism from an American perspective, the same understanding that Barack Obama had of only looking at the liberal, repair the world, rights for everyone, let's take care of everything aspect. That's it. That in that little box. To her, that was being a Jew. When Barack Obama described himself as the most Jewish of all presidents the United States has ever had, that's what he was referring to too. This sense of social justice, liberalism. That's why Obama never got us in Israel. He couldn't understand that we put our survival and existence and ability to get up every morning and breathe ahead of the interests of other people in and out of the region. We don't toe the line of the European Union.
Right.
The EU went, Europe destroyed its 6 million Jews. In our place, they've put about 60 million plus Muslims. How's that been working out for them?
Where did this seed of social justice in liberal American Judaism come from?
This came from the fact that the United States, at a time when it was welcoming refugees, gave these poor persecuted Jews, through American freedom, the chance to, now I don't know if you realize, there was a time in my lifetime when Jews couldn't get, Jewish doctors, Jews graduating medical schools could not get residencies in many hospitals because they weren't Christian, which is why you have Jewish, quote unquote, medical centers.
Okay.
Long Island Jewish Hospital. There were quotas. Jews couldn't join certain country clubs. Near where I lived, Greenwich, Connecticut, that was known as a WASP. Jews couldn't get in there. So the idea that America provided more opportunity at the same time that they were busy chucking their baggage. You know, the stories are told of Jews who threw away their tefillin, the phylacteries, as the ship was entering near Ellis Island. In America, you didn't need that kind of stuff anymore.
So what you're, and your father was actually had some of this when he was, you told the story of going down to Georgia and could not get a job because he was Jewish.
Well, my father was sent down to open a branch of a clothing store. So he and my mother and my brother, had I moved down to Savannah, Georgia. And people wouldn't patronize the store because my dad was a New York Jew. Now, if you were Jewish and Southern, you know, other accommodations could be made. But a New York Jew, you know, bless their hearts.
Yeah.
So, you know, the business failed. My parents came back, lived in my grandmother's apartment. An apartment opened up in the same building. That's how I wound up growing up across the hall from my grandmother. My grandfather passed away by then. And yeah, had I been born a bit earlier, I would have been a Southern boy.
Yeah.
Sure enough.
So history repeats itself in that when the Hebrews went into Egypt, they ended up, as you would say, chucking the Torah as revealed in that day. When the Jews go into Babylon, they end up chucking the Torah as revealed. When the Jews come to America, and so this is why the liberal Jewish mindset is to come to the rescue of puppies and the homosexual agenda and all of these things. I just somehow in my mind I still have a hard time with the disconnect of how social justice, well, I mean, I understand it from a spiritual aspect, but the person that would want to save the whale at any kind, or the polar bear or a puppy or a stray horse or something at any cost to humankind, is the same person that will go to any extreme to kill an unborn child. That's demonic.
Well, you know, if you can step out of your shoes for a second and view it strictly from a liberal perspective of anyone is entitled to do anything that they want, specifically and particularly with their own body, I'm trying to explain their mindset.
Yeah.
But again, remember, there are no Torah values.
Yeah.
The Torah values were all emptied out, and it's no surprise and no shock that Jewish Americans were at the forefront of as you mentioned, every movement. The civil rights movement, great thing, absolutely. Cesar Chavez boycotting lettuce. Although when I was a kid, there was only iceberg lettuce, so better we shouldn't have eaten it. But I mean, yeah, that's what it is. That's why they're so divorced from Israel. And
Yeah.
that's why when people say to me, but I went to college, my roommate was a Jewish guy, or I dated a Jewish woman, and it's simply an accident of birth.
Yeah.
It's not
So,
a statement of faith and commitment.
yeah. And in the end, the people that are so dead set on rights for all will probably be the first ones to sign on to the vaccines for all, and no one has control over their body because it's an agenda. Okay, we got that. So Yom Kippur is going to be a bit on the further isolated for you this year. Sukkot is
Yeah,
also. Um,
yeah. It's my daughter is stuck in Jerusalem. She can't come here. She's by herself. It's a very, very unfortunate situation all the way around. Yom Kippur is a day of very long and introspective prayers. To do that by yourself
yeah,
is a challenge. You draw strength from a community. To be severed from a community is a painful experience, honestly.
I understand that, but at the same time, maybe I mean I see that and I know we gotta wrap this up. I see that the Almighty still controls the events of humankind,
Always.
and we need to spend more time looking at the prophets than the puppets. Netanyahu and other world leaders are mere puppets in his hand. And so maybe this is a call for not just you guys over there in Israel, but for all of us to spend this Yom Kippur a time of introspection. And that introspection may take us back to Passover. There was a lockdown that began at Passover. What have we learned? What have we learned from there to here? Because if we didn't learn anything, then what's the next 6 months or so going to look like? It's going to be filled with the same chaos. There's lessons that he has for us to learn. Maybe this be a time that we all enter into that lesson.
Amen.
Okay.
Beautiful thoughts, Mike.
All right.
Great way to conclude.
Haksameach. Have a blessed time during these festivals and Moedim. And Bezrat Hashem, see you again next week.